Once upon a time, there lived a girl who collapsed whenever her name was called. Her parents named her Moremi, a very beautiful name, which means my elusive child, a name given to children after a long search. However, whenever they called her by the name, she slumped and fell to the ground unconscious. The first time it happened was when she was only 2 years old. Her mother walked into her room with a smile on her face. Moremi, come and eat, she said to her daughter, who froze and fell to the ground unconscious. Her eyes rolled back like a lifeless doll. Panic filled the entire house as her parents rushed her to the hospital. However, by the time they arrived, she was already awake, confused but perfectly fine. The doctors ran every test possible but found nothing wrong with her. They dismissed it as a seizure, but when it happened again and again, her mother, Ronke, decided to investigate further and realized that her daughter only collapsed whenever her name was called. From that day on, Ronke forbade anyone in the family from calling her daughter Moremi. Although it felt so strange, Ronke knew that this was the only way to keep her daughter safe. She stopped her from going to school as the children and teachers always forgot and called her by her name. Ronke took Moremi to several churches, but no amount of prayer was able to save her daughter from the strange curse. Moremi soon became the topic of discussion, as family and friends could not understand why a child would collapse on hearing her name. Moremi's father, Kunle, did not know what to think. Years ago, when he decided to marry Ronke, he had the dream where an old woman warned him not to marry her. He even had another dream where the items he had bought to entertain his guests at the wedding fell into a huge muddy water. Kunle at the time did not read any meaning into it, but his brother Remy did not take it lightly. He warned Kunle not to marry Ronke, but Kunle, blinded by love, waved his brother's warning aside. He had loved Ronke since their university days. She was beautiful, sharp, and extremely brilliant. But now, watching his daughter collapse at the mere mention of her name, Kunle began to wonder if his brother Remy was right all along. He sat with his brother at a fancy bar, pouring out his frustrations, when a young woman walked to their table to join them. Kunle could not believe his eyes. It was Nike, his ex-girlfriend, who he had not seen for so many years. She looked more stunning than ever before, and Kunle did not know when they began to talk about their past. His brother left them at the bar as Kunle had more drinks with his ex-girlfriend Nike. He returned home late that night, drunk and oozing of alcohol. Ronke had never seen her husband in such a state. She questioned him to know where he was coming from, but Kunle began to yell at her angrily. You bloody witch! What's your business with where I'm coming from? Are you not the man in this house? He asked his wife, who watched him puke and fall to the ground. Ronke stood there broken, as her husband never spoke to her in such a way. She watched him fall in his own vomit, her heart shattering in a way that she could not explain. Ronke bent down to help him up, but Kunle slapped her hand and called her a witch. Don't touch me, you witch! You and that cursed child of yours are the reason why everything is falling apart in my life, he said as he drifted into a very deep sleep. Ronke, although heartbroken, cleaned him up and helped him to bed. She sat by Moremi's bed, tears pouring down her eyes as her heart broke into a million pieces. Ronke could not believe that her husband would ever call their daughter cursed, a daughter who once brought nothing but joy to them, after being childless for over 5 years, was now being referred to as cursed by her own father. Sleep eluded Ronke. However, she decided to wait till morning, blaming the alcohol for her husband's unruly behavior. As she turned to catch some sleep, a call came into her husband's phone, and Ronke, curious to know who it was, picked and remained silent. Nike, who could not contain the excitement of the night, called to profess her love for Kunle. Little did she know that it was his wife Ronke on the line. Nike could not stop talking about the great time that they had. She even went on to insult his wife Ronke, calling her a blood-sucking witch. You should have left her years ago, she said as Ronke gripped the phone tighter, trying to contain her anger. Ronke tried so hard not to burst out in anger, but when she heard Nike talking about starting a new life with her husband Kunle, Ronke flared up in anger and called her a shameless husband snatcher. You want to push me out of my home? You shameless woman! Ronke shouted into the phone, her voice shaking with fury. You think because you opened your legs for him and fed him wine that you've won? Nike, listen to me and listen very well. You are nothing but a desperate, bitter woman clinging on to what is not yours. If you ever come close to my husband again, you will regret the day that you were born. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then Nike burst out in laughter. Oh, so the witch finally speaks? Nike said, her voice laced with venom. You can scream all you want, Ronke. He's already mine. You lost him the moment your demon daughter started collapsing like a puppet. She said as she warned Ronke to watch her back. I will teach you that no one insults me and goes scot-free. The line went dead, leaving Ronke in complete shock. The next morning, Ronke confronted her husband about Nike, but Kunle, instead of feeling remorseful, told her to her face that he was going to marry Nike. Ronke froze in shock. She stared at her husband as if she had just seen a ghost. You're going to do what? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kunle's eyes were cold, distant, void of the love that once filled them. I said I'm marrying Nike, he repeated firmly. At least, she's a real woman, not one hiding behind spirits and curses. Ronke's mouth fell open in disbelief. She's not your wife, Kunle. I am, and you have a daughter who needs her father. A cursed daughter, he spat, who faints at the sound of her own name, like some haunted puppet. I can't keep living in fear every time I open my mouth. Nike gives me peace. She understands me. You brought this madness into our lives. Ronke clutched her chest, gasping as if the air had turned to glass in her lungs. I prayed for that child, she whispered. I begged God for her. After 5 years of waiting, I almost died giving birth to her. And here you are, calling her cursed. Well, maybe you should have remained dead and taken your cursed child with you, Kunle said, not knowing that his daughter Moremi was standing by the door listening. Ronke's heart broke to see her daughter standing there. She rushed to her side and gave her a hug, whilst Kunle walked past them unbothered. He didn't care that his daughter heard the horrible thing that he said. All he cared about was making things right with Nike, who he was now rushing to go see. He arrived at the house minutes later, and Nike refused to open the door for him. Kunle stood there for hours, under the rain, pleading and asking for her forgiveness, but Nike sat in her living room watching a movie. She didn't care that he was outside, standing under the pouring rain. All she wanted was to make him suffer, and Kunle stayed out, not caring that he was now drenched in the rain. Hours later, Nike opened the door for him, and Kunle continued to plead for her forgiveness. I'll do anything. Just please forgive me, he said to Nike, who requested for a car. Not just any car, but his wife's car, the one that he recently bought for her on her birthday. You can't claim to love me whilst I move around without a car. Do you want something terrible to happen to me? She asked Kunle, who rushed home to get the car. Ronke was still in her room weeping when Kunle stormed in and grabbed her car keys. He sat up confused as she asked where he was going with the car, but Kunle did not respond. He simply drove away angrily as Ronke dialed his number repeatedly, asking where he was taking her car to. Your car? Have you ever bought anything of value in your life? With your wretched bank account that can't even feed a dog. The next time you ask me such a question will be the last time that you will ever do so, he said to Ronke, who calmly ended the call and began to cry. Her daughter Moremi walked in that moment, sad as she asked her mother a question that she never saw coming. Why does daddy want me dead? She asked Ronke, who could feel the sadness in her daughter's voice. Nothing in Ronke's life had ever prepared her for such a question. She tried so hard to laugh it off, assuring Moremi that her father loved her so much, but Moremi knew better. She sat in the corner calm, wondering what she could have done to her father to warrant such level of hatred from him. Her father, who once called her his princess and didn't spare any opportunity to carry her on his shoulders, spinning around as she giggled away. Moremi could still remember the beautiful memories with her father before the fainting spells began. ruining their once happy family. Her father did not love them anymore, and Moremi could see it as bright as day. Her mother did everything possible to keep things together, but Kunle had already made up his mind. 2 weeks later, something happened that changed the trajectory of Moremi's life forever. Her mother woke up one night screaming at the top of her voice. All efforts to pacify her failed as she ran out of the house yelling and speaking in a strange language. Moremi was so terrified. She stood there and watched as her mother disappeared into the distance. Her father poured all his frustration on her. "You cursed child! Go into your room and don't come out till I say so," he said to Moremi, who ran to her room and shut the door. Moremi laid on her bed, clutching her mother's wrapper as she began to cry. She could not understand what was happening, but all that she knew was that she did not like the way that her mother ran off without a word. The look on her mother's face when she ran out that night was one that Moremi could never forget. Her mother, the only person who still loved and cared for her, was now gone, lost to something that she did not understand. That same night, Moremi's father Kunle moved Nike into their home. No warning, no shame, just suitcases in hand and a wicked smirk on Nike's face. "Welcome to your humble abode," Nike said to herself as she tossed her handbag on the couch, crossing her legs like she owned the place. Kunle took his wife's things and moved them into the boys' quarters. He erased every trace of her in their home, including her pictures, and Moremi was left with nothing but her mother's favorite wrapper. She slept with it each night, wrapping herself in the only thing that reminded her of her dear mother. Moremi felt safe with the wrapper around. She could perceive her mother's scent in it, and this gave her comfort, knowing that one day her mother would return and take her away. She watched in complete horror as her father erased her mother like an old chalkboard. Whilst he did that, his mistress Nike did everything possible to make her presence known in their home. She hated Moremi with all of her heart and spared no opportunity to show it. Every morning, she would march into Moremi's room, calling out her name repeatedly. "Moremi," she would shout, her voice echoing as she giggled, knowing the outcome of what she was doing. And just like that, Moremi's body trembled as she fell to the ground unconscious. Nike stood in the corner laughing as Moremi struggled for her dear life. The moment she regained her consciousness, Nike called her name again and again and watched her fall to the ground repeatedly. Moremi began to live like a slave in her own father's house. Her father's mistress made her do unthinkable things, threatening that if she ever failed to do them, she would scream her name until she dies. Moremi was so scared for her life. She did strenuous chores and lifted items that were too heavy for a 10-year-old. Nike made Moremi clean toilets with her bare hands. She also made her eat her meals from a dog's bowl, and Moremi dared not to refuse. She dared not to cry either, because tears earned her another round of torment. Nike went further each day, inventing new ways to torture the little girl. She made her sleep in wet clothes, saying that Moremi deserved no atom of pity. Nike was a force to be reckoned with. If she was not making Moremi scrub the entire house with a toothbrush, she was making her kneel under the sun, holding huge rocks in her hands as a form of punishment. Nike replaced Moremi's meals with bitter leaf water. She forced her to drink it daily, and Moremi, terrified of what she would do to her if she refused, drank the bitter water as food. Her stomach hurt badly, and Moremi could not help but cry. "If only my mother was here," she said to herself as tears poured down her eyes like a river. Moremi remembered how her mother took care of her. She never went to bed hungry and lived a life full of laughter. But now, her life was a complete nightmare. She had no idea where her mother was and was clueless as to what had really happened to her. Moremi felt a pain that she could not explain. It was as if her heart was being ripped out of her chest as she sat there, hopeless and broken, wishing for her mother to return. Moremi endured everything, but as the days went by, things grew worse. Nike stood in the middle of the kitchen like a queen, her arms folded, as Moremi knelt on the cold towel, singing praises to her with her trembling voice. If Moremi dared to stammer, Nike called her name out as she watched her collapse to the floor. Each collapse left Moremi weaker, but Nike enjoyed each episode like a private show. One night, Whilst Nike was about going to bed, she heard some strange noises in her wardrobe. Huge rats had gained access to her room, and Nike could not help but pour her frustration on Moremi. She locked her in the wardrobe with the rat, and Moremi screamed out in terror as the door slammed shut. Moremi sat there petrified as she sobbed silently, her knees pulled to her chest as her skin crawled at the feeling of the rat brushing past her feet. Moremi stayed there till the next morning, and when Nike finally opened the door, she collapsed out of the wardrobe, weak, pale, and trembling. From that day on, Moremi stopped speaking. She avoided eye contact with everyone and walked slowly like a ghost, afraid of triggering another round of cruelty. But what Nike did not know was that each time that Moremi collapsed because of her, something strange began to happen to her. Moremi slowly began to hear the thoughts of those around her. Each collapse had drawn her closer to the threshold between life and death. Spending so much time in that liminal space had slowly thinned the veil between the physical and spiritual realms, unlocking something within her. She could hear what people were hiding, the lies buried beneath their words, the guilt behind their smiles, and the darkness marked by their actions. Moremi used this to protect herself from her father's wicked mistress. That evening, she overheard Nike's thoughts and realized that Nike had planned to push her down the stairs. Nike could no longer stand Moremi and wanted her gone for good. So, she planned to stage the fall as an accident, but Moremi, knowing her plans, avoided the stairs like a plague. The only time that Nike had the chance to push her down the stairs, Moremi dodged her push, causing Nike to fall down the stairs herself. She broke her wrist and blamed Moremi, who her father yelled at angrily and called the witch. The next morning, Moremi overheard her father's own thoughts. She was cleaning the house when her father walked past her with so many things on his mind. The one that stood out was his plan to send Moremi away because of what he believed that she did to Nike. Kunle could not stand any harm coming to his mistress, so he decided to send his daughter away to close the chapter of his life which he so regretted. Moremi, feeling so heartbroken, decided to run away. She ran to her uncle Remy, her father's brother, who was the only family that she had left. But Uncle Remy informed her that he could not harbor a cursed child in his house. "I can't help you, Moremi. You have to leave my house now," Uncle Remy said to her as he grumbled and walked into the house. Moremi in that moment froze in shock. She did not say a word as she walked angrily to the back of her uncle's house and saw a flower pot with flowers. Moremi pushed the pot to the ground, and to her surprise, she saw two dolls tied together. Moremi could not believe her eyes. She had overheard her uncle's thoughts a few minutes ago about the dolls which were the genesis of her problems. Uncle Remy was the one behind her suffering. So Moremi, in the fit of rage, destroyed the dolls to set herself free. The moment the dolls were destroyed, she heard a loud scream coming from her uncle's house. Moremi walked into the house and saw something that she did not expect. Her mother was tied up in the corner, in chains, as Uncle Remy began to scream out in agony. His entire body burned as he began to confess all that he ever did. What had happened was that years ago, before her father got married to her mother Ronke, Uncle Remy loved Ronke with all of his heart. They were all friends in the university, and Uncle Remy approached her to confess his feelings for her. Ronke turned him down jokingly, revealing that she was already in love with his brother Kunle. The rejection broke Remy in a way that he could not explain. He hid his disdain for them, smiled at their wedding, toasted with them at their anniversary, whilst planning his deep revenge. Remy sought out the help of a juju man. He wanted Ronke to suffer, but not in a way that would take her life. No, he wanted her to live long, enough to feel the weight of sorrow. So, he requested for a curse, one that would make her first child a living burden, a curse so strange that no one would understand it. The juju man asked for something personal, something symbolic, and Remy handed him two dolls, tied together with a red string. He buried them in the pot and sealed Moremi's fate before she was even born. Uncle Remy stood from a distance as he watched them suffer. However, on the night when Ronke ran out screaming, Nike, her husband's mistress, who was working with Uncle Remy to ruin their marriage, did a charm to make her run mad. She wanted to take over her home and saw this as her best bet. However, Uncle Remy took Ronke in to watch her suffer. He walked side by side with his brother's ex-girlfriend Nike to ruin their marriage, not knowing that Nike was Ronke's cousin, who Ronke did not even know existed. Nike knew of this but kept it a secret. She had a deep-seated hatred for Ronke, who did not even know that she existed. What had happened was that years ago, when Nike was only 15, her mother took her to meet with her father for the very first time. When they arrived at his house, they met his sister, who turned out to be Ronke's mother. Nike's mother introduced herself to her, stating that her brother Jide got her pregnant some years ago, but Ronke's mother, instead of being so understanding and passionate, sent them out of the house like beggars. Her brother Jide had just passed away, and Ronke's mother saw Nike and her mother as opportunists. So, she sent them away like beggars, not knowing that truly, Nike was her brother's child. So Nike lived with the hatred in her heart. She made up her mind to ruin Ronke's life because of what her mother did to them. She dated Kunle when he had a brief fight with Ronke, hoping to spite Ronke with it, but Kunle dumped her even before the relationship became serious. He ran back to Ronke, who he eventually married and made his wife. Nike, devastated by the rejection, made a silent vow that if she couldn't be with Kunle, then Ronke would never know peace. So, she reached out to Uncle Remy, who she knew was once in love with Ronke. Together, they forged a dark alliance rooted in spite, jealousy, and generational pain. Nike, as well as Remy, plotted Ronke's downfall, not knowing that the very child that they cursed, the one who they called weak and broken, would one day become their undoing. Now, as Uncle Remy burned from the inside out, crying and writhing in pain, Ronke sat in a corner, trembling but slowly gaining back her senses. Moremi rushed to her mother's side as she used the key on the table to unlock the chains. "Mommy," she whispered as tears poured down her eyes. Ronke turned to her daughter, a spark of recognition flashing in her eyes. "Moremi," she whispered, her voice dry and weak. But this time, Moremi did not collapse because the curse had been broken. Meanwhile, back in Kunle's house, Nike sat in the corner mad. The charm she had done on Ronke had backfired in a way that she never expected. The moment Moremi broke the dolls, not only was the curse lifted, the dark spirits that Nike and Uncle Remy had conjured turned against them. Nike sat in a pool of her own urine, clawing at the air as she muttered Ronke's name over and over again. Her once well-laid wig was now twisted and tangled as she laughed repeatedly, confessing all that she did. Kunle felt a wave of dizziness and fell to the chair unconscious. He woke up a few minutes later, confused to see Nike in his house. What he did not know was that all this time, he was under a spell. He called on his wife and daughter, but found no one in the house. All his wife's pictures and belongings had now been replaced with that of Nike, and Kunle could not understand how it happened. He stood there and listened as Nike confessed all that she did to his family. Kunle could not believe that his brother could knife with his ex to ruin his happiness. He stood there broken as Nike ran out of the house insane. Kunle had to confront his brother Remy. He arrived at his house and met his wife and daughter, who were both shocked to see him. Uncle Remy had now gone mad. He sat in the corner tearing open his sofa as he muttered some strange words underneath his breath. Kunle looked up at his wife and daughter, who were both scared to approach him. Ronke gripped her daughter tightly as she shielded her from her husband. Kunle could see the fear in their eyes. His heart broke to see what his once happy family had been reduced to. He went down on his knees and began to plead for their forgiveness. "I was under a spell. Please forgive me," he said as tears poured down his eyes. "My brother set me up that evening. When I went to him for advice, he invited Nike over and we all had drinks. That's all I remember," he said to his wife Ronke, who burst out in tears, reminding him of all the horrible things that he did to them. "You called our own daughter cursed," she said as Kunle trembled with guilt and bowed his head as if the ground beneath him would open and swallow him whole. Kunle could not remember any of it happening, but he knew that he had hurt his family in the worst way possible. Ronke continued to speak. "You stood by and watched a stranger torture our own daughter. You let her collapse over and over again, and when she needed you the most, You turned your back on her and called her cursed, she said as tears continued to pour down her eyes. Kunle sobbed as he promised to make it right. His daughter Moremi walked up to him and gave him a hug. She could sense the sincerity in his voice, not because of what he said, but because she could hear his thoughts and knew that he was sincere. Ronke watched in silence as father and daughter embraced. Although her heart still carried the scars of betrayal, something inside of her had now cracked open. It was not from weakness, it was from love, a deep aching love that she thought had long been buried. Ronke stepped forward to meet with them. The pain was still fresh, but Ronke knew that her husband was telling the truth. She was too hurt to admit it earlier, but seeing her daughter in her husband's arms reminded her of the happiness that they once shared, a happiness that was stolen from them by people who were supposed to be family. Ronke in that moment forgave Kunle, who promised to make things right. Their joy knew no bounds as they began to rebuild their lives again. Moremi finally went to school, where she thrived and began to excel. She made friends and didn't have to worry about people calling her name because the name no longer held any form of pain. The curse had been broken, not just the spiritual one, but the curse of silence, hatred and betrayal that had once swallowed her whole. Uncle Remy, as well as Nike, learned their bitter lessons as they roamed the streets mad for the rest of their lives. The lesson to be learned from this story is that no matter how long a lie walks, the truth will always outrun it. Light always outshines darkness, so we should never allow jealousy and bitterness to overtake our sense of humanity. I hope you enjoyed the story.